The purpose of this webinar is to provide more information about DEP's proposed Title V and watershed permit regulatory changes. Additional information can be found on DEP's website under the Title V webpage. It is important to make clear that this is not a public hearing, which is an official proceeding under General Laws, Chapter 30A, where the public is given an opportunity to provide public comments that DEP records and considers in finalizing regulations. Tonight, we're having only, or I should say today, we're having only an information session. The public hearings for formal public comment are on November 30th at 6 p.m., which is a hybrid hearing in DEP's Lakeville office, December 1 at 1 p.m. in a fully remote hearing, and last December 5th at 6 p.m. for a hybrid hearing in the Barnstable Town Hall. More information about those hearings and directions for submitting written comments as well can be found on DEP's website, again, under the Title V section. Tonight, we will provide more information on the proposed today, sorry for that error again. Today, we will provide more information on proposed regulatory changes in two ways. First, we will give a PowerPoint presentation that provides an overview of the regulatory changes. And then second, we'll respond to written questions raised by you, the participants, with the question and answer webinar function that you see at the bottom of your screen. With that, and I'm still not seeing any indication that language assistance is needed.
Tim,
yes.
Tim, it's Leldon. I see one participant with their hand up, so we may want to check on if that's something we need to address now.
Oh, I see. Yes, Mr. Markowitz asked a question.
No, Lynn McDermott has her hand up. Oh. And there is a question, like you said, there's a question in the Q&A as well that I don't know if that was addressed by the information you just gave about how to submit public comments, but perhaps we get clarification of that as well.
Okay. Well, I don't see Lynn McDermott's hand up and
any longer. Yeah.
Okay. And we're not, unfortunately, we can't take questions in that way today. We're taking questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Mr. Markowitz has a question, which I'll answer now, and then afterwards we'll defer questions until after the PowerPoint presentation to make for a smoother presentation and also to allow more time for everyone to ask questions and for us to respond. Mr. Markowitz's question is, Tim, will there be any discussion on how to submit regulation-specific comments during the official comment period? Just looking for some guidance on best practices in submitting comments. Thank you. Mr. Markowitz, that's a very good question. And I'm going to direct you to DEP's website under the Title V section. We do have information there on how to submit written comments. And also there's information there as well as to how you can submit verbal comments either remotely or in person during the 3 public hearings that we have scheduled. And there's one more question, and then then we'll move into the PowerPoint. Tim, can you please give the time, date, period for the closing of public comments? Yes, presently the day on which the public comment period, written public comment period is supposed to close is December 16th. Okay, let's move now to the PowerPoint presentation. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth Chubb. And Mary Beth, if you could introduce yourself and begin the PowerPoint, that would be great.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Beth Chubb. I'm the wastewater section chief from the MassDEP Boston office. There we go. So today we're going to provide you with information on the proposed revisions to 310 CMR 15 or Title V, and also to the proposed new regulations 314 CMR 21 for watershed permitting. This presentation will provide information on the environmental situation that has required these changes, the community outreach that DEP did prior to putting these draft regulations out, what these regulatory changes consist of for the nitrogen sensitive area provisions of Title V, and briefly for the new watershed permit regulations. We will also provide information on funding opportunities through our state revolving fund program and also the community septic management loan program. And we will provide information on the public comment period, the public hearing dates and times, how to register for those, and also how to submit public comment. DEP is proposing these regulations to address the water quality issues we are seeing in our estuaries and embayments along southeastern, south coastal Massachusetts, Cape Cod, and the islands. Densely populated areas have resulted in higher nitrogen loads than these water bodies can accept, causing poor water quality and eutrophication. Eutrophication is the accelerated growth of nuisance plants, weeds, and algae. This uses up the oxygen in the water, forcing out finfish, shellfish, and other subaquatic plant species. The result of eutrophication is devastating. The loss of eelgrass beds that serve as nurseries for many fish species happens. Algae blooms, some of which are toxic, cause water body closures. Unpleasant odors and scums develop in the water. Fish kills happen, and there are reductions in important animal life, such as lobster, shrimp, scallops, and mussels. Because of this nitrogen overload, many of our estuaries do not meet the Mass water quality standards. When this happens, the water body cannot support its designated uses, such as supporting aquatic life or recreational uses. This results in an impaired listing for the water body. When that happens, it requires the development of a total maximum daily load, or TMDL. That TMDL is approved by EPA and establishes the amount of a pollutant the water body can accept and still maintain its designated uses. But this is not just an environmental problem, it becomes an economic problem as well, because it causes declines in fishing, shellfishing, and the recreational opportunities of these waters. This can lead to a decline in tourism, which means a loss of business to the area and ultimately a drop in real estate values. Unaddressed, this problem will continue to worsen. This problem is not a new one. In 2001, the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, or MEP, began assessing nitrogen impacts on estuaries and embayments. And this work continued for several years to assess over 89 watersheds. By 2015, the MEP had noted that coastal embayments were being impacted by nitrogen and that septic systems were contributing to this nitrogen load. Also in 2015, the Cape Cod 208 plan to address water quality issues on Cape Cod was approved by EPA and certified by Governor Baker. And under Executive Order 562, DEP was conducting a review of all of its regulations and received numerous comments pertaining to Title V. Because of the number of comments we received on Title V, DEP formed a stakeholder group in 2017. One of those comments received was on nitrogen sensitive area provisions of Title V and how these areas might be redefined to address this nitrogen loading problem to our embayments. From that original stakeholder group, DEP formed the NSA subcommittee to discuss this specific topic. The NSA subcommittee met 3 times from September of 2020 to most recently this past June to discuss potential changes to the NSA provisions of Title V. We looked at expanding the definition of NSA, defining how these areas might be determined, what new nitrogen requirements for these areas would apply, what compliance options there could be, and what the implementation schedule for these new NSAs would be. These changes, this map is depicting the areas, cities, and towns that will be affected by these regulatory changes. If you would like to see the finer print details of this map, you can go to the MEP webpage on mass.gov. Prior to putting out draft regulations, DEP began an outreach efforts to these affected cities and towns. On June 1st, Commissioner Suberg sent a letter out to all the communities explaining the proposed framework for these changes. And in the summer of 2022, the Southeast Regional DEP staff and Boston DEP staff met with 32 cities and towns and other interested groups, such as the Cape Cod Commission, Buzzards Bay Action Committee, Realtors Association, Health Agent Associations, the Cape Managers Association, EPA, and legislators. We met with each of them to present what these reg changes would be and to take in their comments and their questions on these proposed changes. DEP also began development of a web page populating it with information pertaining to these changes, and that is on our Title V regulation webpage at mass.gov. And we are continually updating the information on that webpage. So what are these changes? Currently, Title V defines nitrogen-sensitive areas for drinking water protection purposes. Zone 2's interim wellhead protection areas, or IWPAs, and areas with both on-site septic systems and non-public drinking water supply wells are protected and defined as NSAs. And for those, we impose a loading restriction of 440 gallons per day per acre. These provisions will not be changed in Title V. They will be maintained. What we are proposing is to establish a new designation of what we're calling a natural resource area NSA. There are two categories for the natural resource area NSA. The first is any watershed to an embayment or sub-embayment that is the subject of a nitrogen TMDL approved by the EPA pursuant to the Federal Clean Water Act and an area-wide water quality management plan pursuant to Section 208 of the Clean Water Act addressing nitrogen pollution. This category is referring to the Cape Cod communities. All Cape Cod communities are subject to the Cape Cod 208 plan approved by EPA in 2015. And there are currently 30 watersheds on Cape Cod with EPA approved nitrogen TMDLs. This map, which is also available on our webpage, depicts the Cape Cod areas in the dark green shade. The second category of natural resource area NSAs are any watershed to an embayment or sub-embayment that is the subject of an EPA-approved TMDL or is determined to be nitrogen sensitive by DEP based on a scientific evaluation and adopted through a public process involving public notice, which includes the scientific and regulatory rationale for the designation and affords a 60-day public comment period. So some of the watersheds in this group are depicted in the lighter green and the teal colors. So these are, they do not currently have a TMDL, maybe have a MEP report that has been accepted, but are not operating under the Cape Cod 208 plan with a TMDL. The requirement for a septic system that is in a natural resource area NSA is that that system serving either new construction and for existing facilities must incorporate best available nitrogen reducing technology within 5 years of the effective date of that NSA designation, or the community can obtain and operate under a watershed permit. The proposed regulations define best available nitrogen reducing technology as an alternative system certified by DEP for general use pursuant to Title V that has the lowest effluent total nitrogen performance value. An alternative system with provisional or pilot approval granted by DEP can also be utilized as long as that system has a total nitrogen performance value less than or equal to the system certified by general use with the lowest value. The timing for implementing the requirements for the natural resource area NSA are different depending on the category. For the first group, the 30 Cape Cod watersheds with a TMDL and under the Cape Cod 208 plan, the NSA becomes effective the date these regulations are promulgated. For the second group, that designation will happen watershed by watershed after going through a public process and will become effective the date that DEP, at the completion of the public process, and DEP designates it as a natural resource area NSA. The exemption for the individual system owner to have to install the best available nitrogen reducing technology is for the community to obtain a watershed permit. Then that would not apply to the individual system owner in that 5-year time frame. If a community intends to pursue a watershed permit, they can submit a notice of intent within 18 months of designation of being in the natural resource area NSA, and that 5-year installation requirement would be paused or tolled while they pursued that permit. This flow chart just depicts the two categories and shows how the Title V designation and the watershed permit work together. In the top tier, we have the automatic designation of the 30 watersheds on Cape Cod. That starts the 5-year time frame once the regs are promulgated for the individual to upgrade their system, unless the community submits a notice of intent within 18 months of the regs being promulgated, or the community applies for and obtains the watershed permit. At a later date, the lower group in the orange, the islands, the South Shore, the South Coast communities, or Cape towns that do not have an MDL as of yet, a TMDL, excuse me, as of yet, they would be designated after going through a public comment process. And once that was completed and DEP designated that area, that would start the 5-year time clock. Unless, again, the community submitted a notice of intent within 18 months of that designation, which would pause that upgrade requirement, or the community applied for and obtained a watershed permit. So in addition to those draft revisions to Title V, DEP is also proposing new regulations for watershed permits. A watershed permit is a 20-year voluntary permit instead of the traditional 5-year permit. It is issued to a local government unit or a regional local government unit, or could be issued to multiple local government units that have an intermunicipal agreement. It provides communities the opportunity to employ a greater range of solutions to address water quality needs, including the use of alternative and innovative approaches. And it utilizes an adaptive management strategy that allows the community to try out an alternative or innovative approach, monitor it, evaluate it, and then modify their approach as needed to address their water quality needs. The watershed permit is based on a town-approved watershed management plan. The watershed management plan is a long-term plan to address existing water quality impairment to restore and protect water quality. They can be a comprehensive plan or a targeted watershed management plan. For watersheds with the TMDL, the plan must be designed to achieve compliance with the water quality standards for the TMDL and demonstrate at least 75% pollutant reduction within 20 years. And the regulations do allow DEP to determine an alternative schedule is appropriate based on watershed-specific issues. The watershed permit would follow the public comment issuance process. The public notice would be published in the MEPA Environmental Monitor, in the newspaper circulated in the area of the watershed permit, and also on MassDEP's webpage. There would be a comment period of at least 60 days, and a public hearing could be held if it was requested by the permittee or deemed necessary by DEP. To modify, suspend, revoke, or terminate a watershed permit would also follow the public notice process. There would be some instances of minor modification that would not follow this process, but particularly for revocation and termination, this would follow the same public notice process as the issuance of the permit. And that is because if the permit was terminated by DEP or revoked by DEP, or the coverage was terminated by the permittee, then that requirement to install best available nitrogen reducing technology again applies to the individual systems in that nitrogen sensitive area. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tim Jones, who can speak to these two different tracks of the IA system installation and the watershed permit.
Great, thanks so much, Mary Beth. Mary Beth's given you a general understanding of the two approaches that DEP is proposing. And we thought it'd be helpful to take a little bit closer look at each of them. And a good way to do that would be to use this table to compare and contrast the two approaches. So we see in the first row that the Title V NSA upgrade requirement would be mandatory. It would have to be done within 5 years of the NSA designation, unless, and then we move over to the right-hand column, the community obtains a watershed permit, which would involve implementation of a comprehensive plan to reduce nitrogen loading to meet the specific water quality goals and targets for that community. Another way, as Mary Beth mentioned, for a community to alleviate to have waived possibly the requirement for the upgrade is to file a notice of intent within the first 18 months of the NSA designation. The implementation period is 5 years for the mandatory upgrade and 20 years for the permit. In terms of who pays for the NSA Title V upgrade, it would be the individual septic owner who pays. And in contrast with the watershed permitting regulations and a watershed permit, it would be the community who pays. Moving down, type of participation, it's mandatory for the Title V NSA upgrade requirement, and it's voluntary for the watershed permit, with the caveat that once a watershed permit is entered into by a community, the terms and conditions of that permit must be complied with according to the terms of the permit and the applicable regulations. Funding sources. There is a funding source for the automatic upgrade requirement for the Title V septic system upgrades, and that's called the Community Septic Management Loan Program. And there's more information about that on the website that I mentioned earlier, and also that Mary Beth mentioned as well. And moving to the right, we see for the watershed permitting regulations that there are a number of different funding sources that communities can try to tap into to assist with those projects. Again, more information about those can be found on DEP's website in the Title V section. Effectiveness at reducing nitrogen to achieve target levels. With the NSA mandatory upgrade, it might not be sufficient to meet the water quality goals as noted on the table, leaving the watershed nitrogen impacts insufficiently addressed. And that would mean that further action in the future would likely be required to bring the nitrogen concentrations in the embayments and estuaries down to the target levels required. In contrast, moving to the right with the watershed permitting approach, the watershed permit allows the community to use various ways to reduce nitrogen. It involves a quantitative approach to estimate and reduce nitrogen loads to meet the specific water quality goals and targets that I mentioned previously, and Mary Beth mentioned previously as well. Okay, next slide, Mary Beth.
Hang on. Trying here. Oy. Doesn't want to move.
I think it's a little. I think it's a
little slow.
Maybe a little sluggish from last night.
Maybe.
Okay, moving on to the next page of the table in terms of feasibility. With the Title V NSA upgrade requirement, there are concerns with feasibility in terms of cost of that requirement, a potential shortage of supplies to meet the requirement, and a potential shortage of contractors to meet the requirement as well. And the time period is quite short. It's limited to 5 years. In contrast, the watershed permitting regulations allow for more time, a wider distribution of costs for implementation, and adaptive management to increase feasibility and flexibility. That allows the use of non-conventional methods, meaning that if one method doesn't work in the course of implementing the permit, then that would allow the parties to stop using that method or alter the approach to that method and employ another method to try to reduce nitrogen loads. Moving down in terms of flexibility, the mandatory Title V upgrade is not flexible. There's a short time period in which to implement it, and also it involves the use of IA technology. It's limited in terms of technology. In contrast, the watershed permitting approach would involve a much more flexible, tailored and precise approach to meet the needs and interests of the community. It would allow multiple solutions to be implemented. For example, the non-conventional methods that I was talking about on the row above. Potential benefits. What we would see, generally speaking, with the Title V NSA upgrades is we would see localized improvements and potential benefits to the estuary and embayment areas. In contrast with the watershed permitting regulations, the benefits can be tailored to the entire community. There's greater potential for overall nitrogen reduction, leading to broader watershed improvement. And it can address more than nitrogen. For example, there are a number of freshwater bodies on the Cape and in southeastern Massachusetts that are experiencing the problem of eutrophication that Mary Beth mentioned previously. However, that problem is generally caused by a nutrient and a pollutant called phosphorus, in contrast to nitrogen. But a party that obtains a watershed permit can incorporate provisions to address those nitrogen issues within that community according to the terms of the permit. And then last, moving down to the last row, who bears the burden? With the Title V NSA upgrade requirement, it would be the individual septic system owners who would bear the burden there. And the municipality in which they reside would also be required to approve all upgrades and enforce requirements for those upgrades, with DEP assistance if needed. In contrast, with the watershed permitting approach, the burden is spread across the entire community as that community sees to spread that burden, and it may lead to a community-wide tax or rate increase. And that's the last page of that table. And now we'll move to Maria Pinot. And Maria, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Maria Pinot, and I'm the Director of the Division of Municipal Services at MassDEP, and I oversee the State Revolving Fund program. Today, I will be providing a very brief overview of financing options through the State Revolving Fund program. And I will start with the Community Septic Management Loan Program. This model has been successful in meeting the needs of communities for many decades and could be used to finance the new Title V systems if the proposed regulations are promulgated. The SRF program has been financing this replacement of failed septic systems at participating community for a long time. And the program sets aside $5 million each year to provide 2% interest loans to communities to fund their septic loan programs. Over the past 5 years, the SRF program has issued 29 loans totaling over $14 million at an average loan amount to a community of $450,000. This is how the Barnstable County finances their septic loan program, and it operates its own revolving fund to offer loans to Cape Cod communities and their residents. Next slide, please. So how does the program work? MassDEP accepts loan applications from communities on a rolling basis throughout the year. And communities can apply for financing whenever there is demand from homeowners. The homeowners in turn apply to the town for financing, and the town draws funds as needed from the loans that are provided through the Clean Water Trust, who is our partner in implementing the program. The loan to the community is secured with a general obligation pledge of the communities and receives the traditional debt authorization at the local level. The homeowner's loan is secured through a betterment agreement between the town and the community, and MassDEP or the Clean Water Trust are not a party to this agreement. Next slide, please. Massachusetts general laws govern these agreements and the interest rates that can be charged. The interest charged by the community to the homeowner on these loans can be used to cover the community's administrative expenses to run this program, and any funds that are left over can be rolled into the fund to continue to provide loans to homeowners. The draws made against the loan by the community operate under the Clean Water Trust interim loan program and accrue no interest and no fees. In most instances, the loan to the community is put into repayment within 2 years or sooner if the funds have been used up or if the community decides that they are finished with that program. Next slide, please. In addition to the septic loan program, the SRF program offers low interest loans to cities and towns across the Commonwealth to finance water infrastructure projects that are necessary to comply with the Clean Water and the Safe Drinking Water Acts. Massachusetts expects to receive over $1.1 billion of federal infrastructure funds through the SRF program over a 5-year period through 2026. And to access this funding, participation in the SRF program is necessary. This influx of funds will provide for added loan capacity, but more importantly, it provides for additional loan forgiveness for disadvantaged communities. The image we're showing here is a depiction of the SRF application process for construction projects, since SRF offers financing to all planning projects that are eligible for SRF. The SRF program deadlines are established according to EPA grant commitments and are fairly fixed. However, MassDEP and the Clean Water Trust make every effort to work with communities to ensure that they are able to meet their project's needs. The application process begins with the annual project solicitation that opens at the beginning of July and closes in mid-August of each year. And when the solicitation period closes, MassDEP evaluates all the construction proposals and ranks them based on a pre-established criteria to list projects by priority ranking. Priority projects have usually have a significant benefit, an environmental or public health benefit, and those score high. Only those priority projects, the ones that make the intended use plan, are offered financing. And once we have undergone the public review process for the intended use plan and is finalized, the intended use plan is published at the beginning of the IUP year. And at that time, borrowers may proceed to submit applications and the plans and specifications by the October deadline. Loan commitments are typically issued by the end of the IUP year. And one of the key deadlines that I would like to highlight is the June 30th deadline for the local appropriation of the project at town meeting, because without this approval, an SRF loan is not possible. And once the loan agreements are executed and at that time, bidding and construction may begin. The application process generally takes between 18 months to 2 years from project proposal to having a loan agreement in place in order to start construction. And typically, projects have to move promptly once they make the IUP. Therefore, readiness to proceed is very critical when participating in the SRF program. And proactive planning is necessary, especially now that we have the infusion of federal funding. I would encourage communities to seriously consider participating. This concludes my presentation, and my contact information will be provided in this presentation. If you have any questions about the SRF program, please do reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Turning back to Mary Beth.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Tim. So last night we held this information session as we are doing this afternoon. Both of those sessions have been recorded and they will be posted on our YouTube page, and that link will be posted on the Title V regulation page on mass.gov. We do have public hearings scheduled for these draft regulations. The first is on November 30th. It will be held at 6 p.m. in our Southeast Regional DEP Lakeville office, and that will be a hybrid meeting, allowing both in-person and online attendance. On December 1st at 1 p.m. will be an all online session, public hearing. And on December 5th at 6 p.m. at the Barnstable Town Hall, that will also be a hybrid meeting, allowing both in-person and online attendance. You can register for the online parts of the public hearings at our public hearing webpage, where you will find the links to register, also information on how to submit comments. We are taking comments through our dep.talks@mass.gov link, and that information is available on this page. If you have specific questions for your town, you should contact staff in our DEP Southeast Regional Office. If you have questions pertaining to public hearing and registration, the draft regulations, or how to submit comments, you can contact me, marybeth.chubb@mass.gov. And if you have questions pertaining to funding, please contact Maria Pinode at mass.gov. And that concludes our presentation on this information today.
Great, thank you, Mary Beth. Okay, now that we're done with the PowerPoint presentation, we'll move into the question and answer portion of the presentation and listen to your questions and respond to them as best we can. We hope to get to all of them today. We sort of ran out of time last night. And so if we do run out of time today and aren't able to get to them all, we'll try to follow up with you after today's session to the extent necessary and to the extent they're not already answered on the DEP website. And as an aside, on that website, there's an abundance of information that's been put up there recently that you may find very helpful, including a commonly asked question and answer page that includes several questions and responses to them. But first, before we get into the Q&A, and if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them and ask one of the panelists to respond to them, or more than one panelist to respond to them. Before we jump into the Q&A, I want to ask those folks who have not yet introduced themselves and who are here from DEP to go ahead and introduce themselves, starting first with Drew Osei from the Southeast Regional Office.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Drew Osei, out of the Southeast Regional Office, Lakeville, primarily working in the wastewater program. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew. Gerard?
Good afternoon. I'm Gerard Martin. I'm the Deputy Regional Director for the Bureau of Water Resources in the Southeast Regional Office in Lakeville.
And Millie, you previously introduced yourself, but if you could do so again, because that was in the context of the interpretive function.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Millie Garcia Serrano, and I serve as the Regional Director here in Southeast Region in Lakeville. Thank you.
Thanks, Millie. And Leldon Langley?
Hello, I'm Leldon Langley. I'm the Director of the Division of Watershed Management at MassDEP in our Boston office.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And Mary Beth has introduced herself. And another person who's behind the scenes here helping us out is Tori Wu. She's been very helpful. Big shout out to Tori. Thank you. All right, I'll start reading the questions, and we'll take them as they were submitted. And the first question is, how do you know if you are in a nitrogen sensitive area community? Drew, do you want to respond to that one first?
Sure. So the nitrogen sensitive area, or the natural resource area, NSAs as we're calling it, for the first round, it will be those that have a 208 approved plan, which essentially is the Cape Towns that have a TMDL. So that combination. And those areas will be shown on a map that we'll be providing online, so that everyone could go and see if their town is, well, not just their town, but their specific area is within the watershed area that would be designated as NSA. And then moving afterwards, we'll make sure to upkeep of those maps as we designate afterwards.
Thanks, Drew. Anything to add, Mary Beth or Leldon or Gerard or Millie? Okay, all right. One thing I do want to add, though, is that the CAPE will not take effect. The automatic designation will not take effect until the regulations do become final and effective. And then after that, additional designations don't occur until DEP actually designates and goes through a formal public process to designate those communities. Moving down, let's see. The next question is from Sandra Martin. And the question is, will this regulation impact all of Massachusetts, even though it is targeted at the Cape? In Berkshire County, we have some very large Zone 2 with local water supplies that don't seem to be impacted by nitrogen. Mary Beth?
Hi, so the regulation is specific to the areas that we noted in the presentation. Southeastern Massachusetts along the coast are coastal embayments, the marine environments that are being impacted by nitrogen loading. So not out in Berkshire County. And these are a different type of NSA than the drinking water NSAs that are in Title V. Those will not change. Those will stay as they are now with a loading restriction for building within a Zone 2. Hopefully that answers the question that Sandra asked.
Thanks, Mary Beth. All right, moving down, Katie O'Neill has a very good question. Will communities with more than one watershed still be required to complete the sewering within 20 years? That seems unrealistic for communities with multiple watersheds to be completed within that time frame, unless the state will be funding the entire project. Who would like to tackle that one? Drew, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I can start with that one. And so it's not necessarily a requirement that all sewering is done in 20 years. It's a matter for the towns to go through the practice. Originally, it may be done through the CWMP planning. If not, at minimum, it'll have to be done for the watershed management plan as part of the watershed permit application to see how much reduction can be achieved with the strategies that are chosen in the 20 years. Now, at minimum, we're requiring 75%. And so if 75% can be met without total sewering, then complete sewering is not needed. And so we'll be providing the technical assistance with the towns as they're going through those practices. But it's not necessarily a mandate to sewer, as there's other alternatives that can be used as well that we allow through the watershed permitting approach.
Thanks, Drew. Anybody have anything they want to add to Drew's question? Or I should say answer? Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Drew. All right, moving down, this is from Anonymous. If the watershed permits are voluntary, what's the incentive for municipalities to apply for it? Not many municipalities are in a position to voluntarily spend all that money for facility upgrades when they're not required to. Let's see, Mary Beth, would you like to respond to that question?
Sure. What we're trying to resolve is the nitrogen loading impacts and address removal of nitrogen. And it may be that the installation of IA technologies alone are not going to attain that level of removal that's needed. So the watershed permit is a vehicle for the municipality to utilize, which affords a greater period of time, greater flexibility, the factors that Tim went through in the chart, to allow them to address the water quality issues and get to that removal level that they need. DEP's authority is under Title V to the individual system. We do not have the authority to direct the municipality to apply for the watershed permit. And that is why it's a voluntary permit.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Anything to add by anybody else here? Those are a good, complete answer. Okay.
Yeah, Tim, I
Well-
just add that, many of the municipalities we talked to as outreach already had some kind of, planning underway to address nitrogen in their water bodies. And so they recognize that as, the health of their water bodies as being an incentive, for the community to undertake those efforts.
Thanks, Logan. Yeah, I would also add that over the course of the summer, we met with several communities on the Cape and the Southeast region and also the islands, and several of them were interested in the watershed permitting program and initiative because it provided them with momentum to keep moving forward and to help others move forward with necessary reductions in nitrogen. Okay, moving down to Claudia O'Brien's question. Please explain your terminology. I don't understand your abbreviations nor the words. Watershed management plans. What's a TMDL? How will you get rid of the diesel detergents, et cetera, that are really polluting our waterways? This is a hardship to Massachusetts citizens. We need public water and sewers if you don't want real estate values to go down, because these new regulations will have an extremely negative impact on residents of Massachusetts. Well, in terms of the abbreviations and definitions, Mary Beth went over some before, and there are several discussion points on the website that talk about what specifically is a watershed management plan. And briefly speaking, it's a comprehensive plan that analyzes how a community can best reduce nitrogen within that community. Let's see, we realize that this will put costs on people within Massachusetts. However, by the same token, so does ongoing pollution and unaddressed pollution. And right now, this is the balance that DEP is seeking to achieve and needs to achieve. But I'll refer to anybody else who wants to add to that answer, Mary Beth or Drew or Leldon.
Yeah, I'll just add that TMDL is total maximum daily load, and that information can also be found on our website. And also within the context of watershed permitting, even though we take that term TMDL, total maximum daily load, the reports from the watershed permit process will be annual. And so we're really looking at the annual contribution, looking at annual reductions of the nitrogen load, just because, not one day, it's really the same, and it's very hard to regulate nitrogen reduction day to day. And so it's it's better when we're looking towards actual habitat restoration, and just more feasible to do it on an annual basis. So yeah.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah, and
Drew.
just one small bit more on the definition of TMDLs. And so it's generally a calculation of the pollutant load, the load of any pollutant that can be, attenuated into a watershed or into a water body before it starts to have negative impacts on that water body. Much of the data that's used to support and develop TMDLs is collected by the Watershed Planning Program at MassDEP. And we also accept data from other parties, provided that it meets our quality control requirements.
Thanks, Walden. Okay, I see that we have 33 questions still open in the inbox, so we have a lot of questions to go through. So I'm gonna try to move as quickly as we can to get to all of the questions. The next question is, will DEP prepare a plan map showing the limits of this new nitrogen sensitive area? There are two maps presently posted on the DEP Title V webpage. Both were shown previously by Mary Beth, and they'll give you a general understanding of where the proposed nitrogen sensitive areas may be. As we move forward, we're working on more detailed and more precise maps that will give a truer reflection of where specific properties are located relative to the nitrogen sensitive areas. Anything anybody else wants to add to that? Okay. All right. Moving down, Brian Grady, is there a preliminary map available? I just answered that question. And he asked if there's a MassGIS data layer, and I answered that question as well. Yeah, more details will be coming out and they'll be posted on the website. Let's see, Anonymous asks, if someone is proposing a new or upgrade to a SAS in the near future before adoption of reg, should they plan for this, i.e. add a N removal, nitrogen removal technology now so that they will not need to alter add component in the future? Could it be any currently approved N removal technology? Good question. Mary Beth?
So in terms of the regulation, unless your town had a requirement for you to do this, you would not be required to do it until the regulation was passed. If you wanted to be proactive, then yes, the alternative technologies that are currently approved could be utilized. And there are two technologies currently demonstrating their performance in provisional that could also be utilized, but it would just not be a requirement under Title V prior to the regs being promulgated.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth. Anything to add by anybody? Okay. All right, moving down, Michael Loberg asks, well, I'm not sure if it is a question, that just states revolving fund access for 5-year IA programs. I assume that Mr. Loberg is referring to accessing funding to assist with the Title V upgrade requirement, the 5-year upgrade requirement. And it's a good question. There is an abundance of information on the Title V webpage on DEP's website. And if you need additional assistance, Maria Pinot, who spoke earlier about this, has provided her contact information, and I'm sure she would be happy to follow up with you if you wanted to reach out with her and ask for more information. Anything else anybody wants to add to that? Okay. The next question is from Philip Weinberg, and it says the MEP report and the EPA approved TMDL link established compliance with water quality standards to be based on achieving the approved nitrogen concentration limits at the Sentinel stations. The permit requires ongoing water quality to be monitored/tested to determine progress toward compliance. But the watershed permit regs state that the permit won't be issued without achieving nitrogen loading goals. In my community, but the watershed permit regs state the water permit won't be issued without, I think it should state without a proposal that would achieve nitrogen loading goals. In my community, the estuary is currently at or near compliance with TMDL Sentinel station targets. If compliance within the nitrogen limits, water quality limits is the standard for compliance, why isn't that taken into consideration instead of basing compliance solely on historic modeling of nitrogen loads? Drew, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so it's a fine balance between making progress towards the concentrations at the Sentinel station, as well as allowing travel time to take place, as it's been estimated of 7 to 10 years travel time, just on average. It may be different from embayment to embayment, but on average throughout the MEPs, it's about 7 to 10 years to actually see consistent impacts in the embayment. So there's a fine balance between seeing, actually getting reduction, having the time of travel, and then, as you're pointing out to, we have the balance of the reduction versus actually getting to 100% and then meeting the goal. And so even though we are requiring the 75%, and it's going to vary from community to community. If you can go towards 100, we'll encourage that. And if you are close to 100%, already achieving that, then it's just a matter of monitoring and assuring that the concentrations at the stations are maintained, that you're on a monitoring plan at those Sentinel stations. So I hope that answers the question. I think that's at least that's from how I'm understanding it, of why we're not just making everyone do 100%, because everyone's at a different space where how much load has to be reduced. And even as you're acknowledging in your town, you're close. And so that's good. We just have to make sure that the concentrations stay so habitat restoration is actually realized.
Okay, good answer, Drew. Thank you. Anybody else want to add on to that?
Tim, I just wanted to also add that Southeast Region, during the course of the summer outreach, we met with cities and towns, over 50 meetings, and some towns actually requested a second meeting. So we're more than happy to sit down and roll out the maps and really talk about achieving compliance goals and an overall strategy in general. So we stand ready to assist any community that has further questions or needs any kind of technical assistance.
Great, thanks, Millie. Anybody else? Okay.
And also just
Drew.
last point on that. In another technical assistance that we'll follow up as we're doing this process is if the towns need to do a update simulation to make sure that they're meeting the goals, to incorporate new loads that are within their watershed, then we'll encourage that to be done, because the loads that may be reflected in the MEP may not be the same as what's today, depending how build out was actually realized, or what part of build out, or if there's any new development, so to say. And so that is also a practice that's part of our technical assistance in getting to an actual watershed permit, is making sure that the land use is properly reflected.
Great, thanks for the follow-up, Drew. All right, moving down to a question from Kimberly Pearson. Massachusetts is now one of only 3 states that have not pursued delegation of the NPDES program. As a result, for watershed permits of any complexity, EPA delays of up to 10 years may occur. Regulatory programs work best when the regulators and the polluters get to understand each other's problems and can work together for positive sum results. From the perspective of DEP, what benefit accrues by Massachusetts choosing to remain a minority outlier with respect to NPDES? Well, this question this question
Tim, that
isn't
one-
precise. This question isn't really on point, but I see Leldon is willing to respond. So Leldon, go ahead.
Yeah, this one is within my area of responsibility. So MassDEP did pursue delegation as recently as around the 2019 timeframe. And the pursuit of delegation was not successful in that particular effort. I also want to say that EPA has significantly increased their the number of permits that they are processing, and that processing of permits, renewal of permits, and processing of new permits is really at a more accelerated pace than it has been in the past, and they are trying to catch up on projects that have or dischargers that have permits that have not been renewed in some time. So we do recognize that there is a need for collaboration and interaction between MassDEP and people who have discharge permits. And so, Drew and his colleagues there in the Southeast are providing that kind of collaboration with the municipalities. Let's see what else we have here. And also just noting that there are a few surface water discharges on the Cape, largely due to the size of the water bodies there. Primarily the NPDES or surface water discharges exist in the non-Cape areas, Buzzards Bay, South Shore, for example. I think that hits the major points of that question.
Okay. Thanks, Leldon. Any follow-up from anybody? Okay. All right, moving down. Kendra Beaver asks, does the watershed permit need to be implemented within 5 years? If not, filing the NOI would delay costs and improvements. The answer to that is no, the watershed permit doesn't need to be implemented within 5 years. What needs to happen is it needs to be obtained within the 5-year time period to delay the mandatory upgrade under Title V. And that's why we have the provision there to allow a community to file a notice of intent to pause that 5-year upgrade requirement. And the intent of that is to give the community some breathing room to apply for and obtain a watershed permit, as long as they're showing reasonable progress towards getting that permit. And if they don't show reasonable progress towards getting that permit within the 5-year time period, then DEP can terminate that period, and that would revive the upgrade requirement in that instance. Anybody want to add anything onto that answer? Okay. All right, moving down, Philip Weinberg has another question, and it is, under the draft regulations, best available nitrogen removal technology does not apply to all existing septic system owners, only those with a certificate of compliance at the date of NSA designation. My community has 7,000 facilities, nearly all of which are totally dependent upon septic systems and private wells. There are likely hundreds or more non-compliant systems and historic compliant conventional systems which did not qualify for or obtain a COC, Certificate of Compliance. What is the environmental protection rationale for requiring best available nitrogen removal technology only from fully compliant owners? Doesn't the proposed rule create an incentive for non-COC compliant facilities not to obtain a COC before designation? COC means Certificate of Compliance. That's a good question. Mary Beth, do you want to answer that?
I actually would ask Phil to have a little patience. I would like to look directly at the reg language and then give a response. So I will get back to you, Phil, on that specific question. The intent was to capture the point in time when the regs were promulgated to say what was existing and what was new construction and where that boundary was, I believe. But I will definitely take a look at that and then provide a detailed answer. And we will be adding to our question and answer document our responses, so everyone will be able to benefit from my response back to Phil.
Yeah, I was gonna add that as well, Mary Beth, and remind people that there is a question and accurate answer document on the website right now. And we will be adding good questions and not just good questions, but we'll try to be all encompassing with questions and answers in that document, and we'll add to it as we move along. Okay, you go
Jim,
ahead.
I would also just note that, this kind of a detailed analysis of regs that might have some type of shortcoming that we hadn't identified in the drafting. This is the kind of comment that would particularly be helpful to be submitted during the public comment period, so that we could make sure to take a hard look at that and determine whether there's an adjustment needed in the language in the reg.
Yeah, thanks, Loudon, and thank you for the question. It's a good one. All right, moving down from anonymous. Will a property in a defined watershed who currently meets or can meet nitrogen loading, i.e. 440 GPD per acre, be required to install IA technology? Mary Beth?
So if that system is also in, the 440 applies to the drinking water protection area. And so that's why you would have that loading restriction. But if that same facility was identified to be in a natural resource area, NSA, then it would be the requirement to meet not only the 440, but have best available nitrogen reducing technology. They have to comply with both. So depending on what the system is that is being utilized, then you would have to determine whether or not they would need to upgrade or install a different system that would qualify as best available.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Anybody want to add anything onto that answer? Okay.
Well, the town gets a watershed permit, and
Well,
maybe you don't need to upgrade.
Right. Thanks, Gerald. Okay, moving down. David Cleary asks, if I am upgrading my septic system currently, can I incorporate this change now? Mary Beth?
Yeah, so same response. I think we had the similar question before. You would not be required to do so. And if, as Gerard just pointed out, if the town goes the option of the watershed permit, you may not need to. So you're not required under Title V to do it until the regulation is promulgated. You could voluntarily go ahead and make that change, but you would not be required to do so.
Okay. And I see we still have 35 questions remaining. So to the extent, if I'm moving down here and I see that a question's already been asked and answered, I'm going to move on to the next one. And if whoever asked that still wants us to follow up on that, please email one of us and we will follow up. I'm just trying to get to as many new questions as we possibly can. The next question is, any implications for groundwater discharge permitting program and/or thoughts/plans for future regulations of nitrogen from PSTFs? Drew or Mary Beth?
PSTF, that's, I was good with the question until the last part. Mary Beth,
Mary Beth, you're
do you
muted.
know?
Private sanitary treatment facility would be my,
Okay, yeah.
as opposed to public. PWTF, I think, is more what we use for an acronym, but I would.
So, but it's speaking to public, not private, or private, not public.
Well,
That's where I'm unsure, because the question changes, the answer changes depending on that.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
well, we can, I guess, speak to both.
Well,
Drew.
I'll guess, if it's public, that facilities limits, considerations of it, the permit in general would be rolled into the watershed permit, and with the annual reporting and fifth year larger reports, we would be looking at the loading, the load reductions from the treatment facility as part of the holistic reductions towards the targets. On the private side, that's a bit harder to do, but we still are proactive in looking at those facilities and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, and complying with their permits to assure that they're not getting in the way of meeting the concentrations in the sentinel stations and promoting habitat restoration. So with those, they're not necessarily incorporated into the watershed permit, but it's more on DEP's end to work with those entities.
Thanks, Drew. Any follow-up from anyone? Okay. All right, down to the next question. Brian Melanson wondering whether MassDEP is targeting other issues like phosphorus runoff and developing new regulations to mitigate those issues in concert with the nitrogen issue efforts. The answer to that is right now we're focusing on nitrogen because of the significant impacts we're seeing in those coastal waters. And a way to address phosphorus is for the community to get a watershed permit and address the phosphorus through that watershed permit. Any other follow-up from anyone to address that issue? Okay.
Just a quick note, Tim, during the summertime that came up, and also by extension perfluorinated compounds. And we spoke about the fact that sometimes a combination of alternatives, potentially including traditional, non-traditionals, could potentially address phosphorus and other emerging contaminants.
Okay, thanks, Millie. Great. Let's see, the next question is from Marcia Galvin. How does this new regulation affect campgrounds? Campgrounds have tried through legislation to revise regulations since 2007 in CMR 15.00, which is Title V regulation, septic system regulations, without response. Let's see, who would like to respond to that one? Drew, do you want to respond to that?
I have to think about it a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, your history doesn't go back that far. Mary
No,
Beth?
but I would, this is another one I'm going to defer because I would like to look exactly at the language in Title V pertaining to campgrounds. But I will also mention that, campgrounds did come in under the stakeholder group. And we did begin discussions with campgrounds under that group. And they just reached a stopping point and haven't moved further. So we aren't, not talking to them, trying to make progress with them. But yeah, I would, Marcia, I would just like to look directly at Title V and then see how these revisions would specifically apply to the campground situation because they are unique.
And they're ubiquitous on the Cape. So it has come up in our conversations, but more so towards the campgrounds that haven't qualified for the exemption within the Title V. And with those, we work with them to make sure they're upgraded accordingly. Because usually we have a pretty strong effort of, if there's cesspools, making sure that those are removed and upgraded appropriately. But in context of these regulations, if they're already meeting the exemption, we haven't spoken on that further. So.
Okay, thanks, Drew. The next question is from William McGovern. Does implementation of mandatory upgrades for individual sewage systems apply to all systems or just those being upgraded due to failure? I think the answer is it applies to all systems unless they have best available nitrogen reducing technology and they're in a designated nitrogen sensitive area and the community has not obtained a watershed permit and had that requirement waived or filed a notice of intent. Does anybody want to follow up on that answer?
No, that's correct, Tim. It's just whether or not you're in the designated area. And it is both existing and new construction systems. It's not a failure criteria driven requirement.
The next question is from Jennifer Loughran. When do you think you will have last night's presentation and today's presentation posted to your YouTube channel? Though both the same, they are very informative and would be great to share with our organization's supporters through our communication channels. I think last night's might already be posted. And I think today's will probably be posted today or tonight. So as soon as possible is the answer to that question. And thank you for your comment. And I hope you do share it and get the information and the message out to as many people as possible. The next question is from Denise Ellis Hibbett. Is there a possibility that other areas in Massachusetts will be designated as NSAs in the future that aren't in Southeast Massachusetts, Cape Cod areas? Let's see, who would like to handle that question? Mary Beth?
Sure. So as studies are done and impairments are noted in other areas than what we're focused on at this time, then yes, it could potentially in the future apply to other areas, other coastal areas of Massachusetts. But we are aware of the problem currently in southeastern Mass, Cape Cod, and the islands. That's been well documented. And so that is the focus at this time.
Thanks, Mary Beth. The next question we addressed previously mostly, but I want to read it again and then just be clear on one thing that Mary Beth clarified last time. And the question is, will existing properties with conforming Title V on-site systems meeting all current nitrogen loading and Title V requirements be deemed in failure and given 5 years to upgrade to a denitrifying system? The answer to that is they will not be deemed in failure. What happens is if the system is located within a nitrogen sensitive area as designated by DEP, and it does not include best available nitrogen reducing technology, it's not declared to be a failure. It's declared under these proposed regulations to be in that designated NSA and to be required to include the best available nitrogen reducing technology. So it's not a failure. It has to include that new technology, however, under the proposed regulations. Anything to add by anyone? Okay. Moving down, L. Perry. Oh, I think I just answered that one. Moving down. Oh, Anonymous asks, where can we find the list of people and organizations who are on the stakeholder committees you mentioned, including the NSA subcommittee? Mary Beth?
So you would submit a public info request through our website and request that information, and then we would provide you with that information.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Moving down, Karen Walega has a question. We have some large public wastewater facilities that discharge into water bodies. Are these treatment plants going to be made to comply with these regulations as far as nitrogen reduction goes? If not, why not? Some of these plants discharge huge amounts of wastewater into water bodies. Mary Beth?
Yeah, or I
Or
could take
Weldon?
them too. So if they're discharging to a water body, then they're a surface water discharge, and so that would be covered under the NPDES program, which is in my group. So those facilities, we would be looking at whether the water body to which they discharge is impaired for nitrogen or any other pollutant, and then those if they were required to upgrade, if there was a need for an upgrade because of that impairment, then that would be done at the time of re-permitting or renewal of the NPDES permit of that facility with EPA and in conjunction with DEP. Anything else? Anybody else wants to add to that response?
Okay. Thanks, Weldon. The next question is from Kent Nichols. Does DEP have numbers on how many Title V systems are affected by the regulations in all affected communities? Well, the potential effects, for example, on the Cape, if all systems were in designated nitrogen sensitive areas on the Cape, the potential would be there's approximately 85,000 septic systems on the Cape. However, these regulations wouldn't affect all of those unless there were no watershed permits obtained. And they were also, some of them may actually be, in southeastern Mass or in the islands and not subject to the Cape 208 plan too. So the answer is it depends on how many areas ultimately are in designated NSAs and how many communities do not obtain a watershed permit or file a notice of intent. But for example, on the Cape, it could be upwards of approximately 85,000. Anybody want to add on to that?
I would just add that towns are very aware of typically of the number of septic systems that they have, and that's a good resource for your, to go to your community and ask.
Okay. Here's a good question from L. Perry. Is there no distinction / exemption or deadline for upgrades between undersized lots with cesspools that do not meet any current standards and large lots that have on-site Title V systems in compliance with all current standards? Basically, does nitrogen loading GPD per acre no longer mean anything for individual lots under this proposed new mandate, denitrifying mandate upgrade for on-site systems? Mary Beth, do you want to answer that one? Or Drew?
So I think the distinction first to be made is that the 440 gallons per day per acre is again a drinking water protection loading rate. And that may not be sufficient to address the natural resource area nitrogen removal rates that we need. Any conventional septic system is not designed to treat for nitrogen. So we did not make a distinction between the different types of systems that would be out there. The idea is that if a watershed permit is not pursued and the individual owner needs to upgrade, they would be bringing their current Title V, whatever their system is, up to into compliance with current Title V, and that could be through local upgrade approval, and then adding the nitrogen removal that's required because they're located in that watershed.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Anything to add by anybody? Okay. Moving down, Gary James asks, what is the definition of the maximum treatment required for single-family homes? Are we looking at a 30-30-30 minimum for the proposed STU? Mary Beth or Drew?
I'll just say we don't have a standard right now established within the draft regs for best available technologies. And within watershed permitting, however the technology is used, it really depends upon how it's being complemented by the other technologies. And so you wouldn't place too much of a burden of an expectation of a concentration on one technology because it's being helped by a concert of reduction by technologies. And so it's not one exact number for every system within watershed permitting. It really depends on that watershed permit.
Thanks, Drew. Anything to add by anyone? Okay. Let's see, moving down, James McLaughlin asks, we already answered that one, so I'm going to move down to Gary Markowitz. Mr. Markowitz asks, do you accept that the Cape is essentially on a single aquifer for its drinking water? If so, shouldn't the regulations of less than 10 milligrams per liter of nitrogen apply to all Title V systems? Mary Beth?
So this one goes to the distinction we make between the groundwater discharge permit threshold and Title V. So less than 10,000 gallons per day are operating under Title V on a conventional septic system. And over 10,000 gallons per day, you're required to obtain a groundwater discharge permit. And that discharge is required to meet the water supply standards to protect groundwater as drinking water. So the less than 10, it's not framed in that same way, which is why the septic systems have not previously been designed to meet the nitrogen limitations. Did I get all his questions?
You did.
Okay. But just additionally, the designation as in the natural resource area, in order to meet the nitrogen removal, you are potentially, depending on the situation of each watershed and embayment, looking at having to meet less than 10. Again, but a distinction between drinking water and the estuary nitrogen loading.
Thank you. L. Perry asks, if a homeowner has upgraded to meet Title V within the past few years, is there no deferment for such? They too are still under the 5-year deadline. I assume he's talking about having upgraded in the last 5 years without nitrogen reducing technology. I'm going to make that assumption. Mary Beth, do you want to respond to that question?
I believe we incorporated within the last year in the regs.
That's correct.
So if it was installed within the last year, when the regs are promulgated, you would not again be required to reinstall a different system.
Correct. Thank you. Moving down. David Drain asks, since the current septic loan programs routinely run out of money before the fiscal year ends, how will they help with the added mandated upgrades of functioning systems? Drew?
It's more of a question for Maria.
Mhm.
So this definitely should be directed to her, but I recall in some of the meetings we've had during the summer with towns, this question was asked and she responded by saying that the towns can request for more money because the towns are working in between the resident and DEP as lending. And so the towns can request for more money to have available for the program. And to date, in terms of the program overall running out of money, that hasn't occurred. So if there's an extinguishing of funds, that's more on the local level, and it's a responsibility of them to request more.
Thanks, Drew. And I see Maria has opened up her video. Maria, do you want to add?
Yes, as I mentioned in my presentation, MassDEP accepts applications on a rolling basis whenever there is need. So I would encourage communities to participate in the program and submit their applications if there is demand from homeowners for replacement. Right now it's for failed septic systems. So that is the answer.
All right. The next question pertains to maps, which I previously answered. The next question is, why is DEP, it's from Anonymous, why is DEP proposing the installation of IA systems as an alternative if they are not confident the desired goal will be achieved? Also, this option, I assume the desired goal that they're referring to is to meet the target reduction goals for the nitrogen loading. Also, this option is, if implemented, will impose extreme impact on the local authorities who already have challenges with enforcement and compliance with permits for nutrient reduction. Who would like to answer this? Either Mary Beth or Mary Beth, do you want to answer it?
Sure. So I think, as I mentioned before, DEP's authority is with Title V and the individual septic system. We do not have the authority to require municipalities to come in and get a watershed permit. But with these regulations, want to put that forth as an option. And for the installation requirement on the individual owner, it is possible, depending on the situation of the embayment and what is going on in the community, that there will be situations where this option will work to the installation of the IA systems. But there may be situations where it isn't going to get to the goal of removal that they need. So we're offering both, but our authority again lies in Title V and the individual septic system.
Thank you. L. Perry then asks, will there be any better tax deductions for someone mandated to upgrade to an expensive denitrifying system within 5 years? Presently only $2,000 per year up to 3 years. Now these advanced treatment systems will be 3 times the cost and should at least have 3 times the tax deductions, if not all deductible, if the state really wanted to help homeowners. It's a good question. Who would like to take that on? Mary Beth or Drew or Maria?
I would just say, I don't know if Maria has input. I myself have not heard of a tax credit being done, but this is again, a comment that should be submitted officially on the draft. You know, if the requests are made and they're numerous, then, you know, it gains attention, and I defer to Maria for further input.
Yeah, I believe this is in the purview of MassDOR, Department of Revenue. So I do not know what the answer is.
Because they're referring to a tax deduction. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. The next question is from Brian. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure, Drew. Go ahead.
If I could just add to Mary Beth's last answer with respect to meeting the reductions. So there's a higher likelihood that it may suit the portion of load for that town on the sub-abatement level rather than the full abatement. So I just wanted to add that to her answer.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is from Brian Horsley. Do you see a role for composting and urine diverting toilets and reducing nitrogen pollution at the source? If so, are these viewed by DEP as best available technology since they produce zero effluent, or as non-conventional methods as allowed under the watershed permit option?
So I'll take this one. Brian, thanks. We actually had this question also in our info session last night, and it's brought forth a point we haven't really developed. But essentially we would need data on the system. With a composting toilet, at least you still have gray water disposal that would be happening. So we would need to evaluate that further and then determine how it would fit into the best available nitrogen removal technology scheme. But thank you for bringing it up. It's a good point and something we have to investigate further.
And in terms of watershed permitting, towns are more than welcome to include that in their plan, and they'll have to do pre and post sampling to prove that there's a reduction. But I will say a town under their CWNP, comprehensive wastewater management planning, has tried to encourage a town to do that, and people of that town just weren't open to it. And so whatever strategy is chosen does also have to fit the social aspect of it and be acceptable to the town.
The next question is a really interesting one. Gary James says, a number of the TMDLs are predicated on current roadway and culvert restrictions that limit flushing capabilities. Will this program look at these issues?
Tim, I can take that one.
Sure.
So we do include a variety of different types of nitrogen reducing, approaches in the watershed permit. That's the goal. Some of the places where those tidal restrictions exist, are being addressed to try to improve flushing and try to address pollutant loads. I think Muddy Creek in Chatham was an example of that. In the last several years, that culvert has been replaced. So, if those modifications were done and submitted as part of the watershed permit application, or the plans to do that was submitted as part of the watershed permit application, then that could be taken under consideration as part of the nitrogen reduction proposal from that municipality.
Thanks, Weldon. Any follow-up from anyone on that? Okay.
I can take the next one too. Shouldn't there be associated new regulations for fertilizers used that contribute to the nitrogen problems for residential and commercial golf courses and cranberry bogs? So MassDEP doesn't have jurisdiction over the regulation of fertilizers. I believe that jurisdiction is with the Department of Agricultural Resources. However, you know, if fertilizer reduction was something that was part of the watershed permit application, it's something we could consider. I believe it was in last night's session when Drew pointed out that he has been working with some of the facilities who are conducting fertigation, which is, you know, a way to reduce nitrogen while undertaking irrigation practices. So that would be an example where that type of reduction could be made, possibly by implementing best management practices, possibly with some structural control measures at those facilities. And if that was done, that could be considered in part of the watershed permit act.
Thanks,
So
Weldon.
Tim, we do have some examples of that in the Southeast region, and we'd be happy to work with parties that are interested, but mostly a lot of communities are also moving forward with bylaws to address the reduction of use of fertilizers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Millie. Thanks for the follow-up. Let's see, the next couple of questions have been asked and answered for the most part. The next question is from Anonymous, and the question is, does eutrophication just happen in estuaries, i.e. wetlands, rivers, and streams?
So I can take that one. So an estuary, by definition, is a place where freshwater and saltwater mix or meet. So those estuaries can extend considerably upstream in some areas, like say the Taunton River. The saltwater tidal influence reaches as far up as Berkeley and Dighton, for example, in those locations. But more to the point of the question, eutrophication can happen in freshwater systems as well. But typically that eutrophication is driven by phosphorus in freshwater systems and nitrogen in marine and brackish systems.
Thanks, Weldon. The next question is from Jeffrey Brem. And the question is, full compliance under Title V is presumed to be protective of public health, safety and welfare, and the environment under 310 CMR 15.003. So how can DEP legally actually require individual IA systems after the fact? If the septic system was previously approved under Title V and is not in failure under 310 CMR 15.303, the answer to this was previously alluded to, and the answer was that the current systems don't provide protection for nitrogen. And we are giving ourselves the legal authority to do that under the regulations to regulate nitrogen in those Title V systems. So we're changing the law to provide more protection for these natural resource areas. Anybody want to follow up on that answer?
I would just add that we're doing so because we are seeing actual impacts from nitrogen. So these systems in these areas are not being fully protective anymore. So that is why we are now implementing this requirement for nitrogen removal for these areas.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Let's see. Moving down. I'm trying to get to questions that haven't really been answered yet. William McGovern has a question. Following my previous question, as most IA technologies commonly require reporting of maintenance to local authorities, is consideration of that additional processing factored in for Board of Health staff? Mary Beth?
So what I'll speak to on that is that DEP is working with Barnstable County to utilize their IA database that they have for the reporting of IA system data. We've already begun working with Barnstable, and they have incorporated technologies under piloting approval. And we're working with them to now incorporate systems that have provisional use approval, and hopefully eventually we'll get to the general use. And many towns already report to the Barnstable County system, and boards of health are able to access that information. So we are working on some streamlining of reporting so that it won't be an additional burden.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth. The next question pertains to, and this one's coming up again, so I'm going to respond to this one again. Why is there no available mapping tool available for the public to be able to search for their properties to see which watersheds they lie in, and if there is a TMBL for said watershed? Well, presently there are 2 maps on the website that allow one to generally determine where these potential nitrogen sensitive area watersheds are relative to your individual property. And we intend in the next couple of months to update that with a more precise map that would enable one to put in your property address and determine where your residence or business or other property lies relative to the watershed area. So we are working on that as quickly as we can behind the scenes. Anybody want to follow up on that? Okay, but again, you know, on the website now, there are maps with general watersheds outlined, and so you can get a general idea of where you are situated relative to the watershed area. Let's see. Do any towns have a watershed permit at this time? The answer to that is yes. The Pleasant Bay Alliance involves 4 communities who have a joint permit for Pleasant Bay, and they entered that joint permit approximately a little bit over 5 years ago, and they just filed their 5-year report, and the 5-year report states that they've achieved about 80% of their intended nitrogen reduction for the 5-year time frame. Anybody want to add on to that answer?
I think it's a 4-year, correct?
Yeah, just a nice correction. 4 years.
Oh, pardon?
A 4-year report.
Oh, 4-year report. Oh, sorry, I thought it was 5 years. Okay, all right, thank you. Thanks for the correction. All right, moving down, Clifford Carroll. Mr. Carroll's asking again about the maps. So we're working on that. Moving down.
Just one clarification, Tim, if I may,
Sure,
I just want to point out, in your question, Clifford, you say we have one and only public hearing. We actually have 3 public hearings scheduled. One on November 30th in our Lakeville office, one on December 1st, that's all online. And then the one you referenced in your question on December 5th at the Barnstable Town Hall. So hopefully some of those dates work out.
Okay.
And you can also submit comments through dep.talks@mass.gov at any time.
Okay, the next question, let's see, we have, it's 1:49, we have 11 minutes left. The next question, we have 19 open questions. The next question is from Anonymous. If a municipality was issued a watershed permit, would DEP approval be necessary for Board of Health Title V decisions on every construction project per proposed section 21.053A? If not, would a local Board of Health decision in line with its approved watershed management plan on a 40B project that did not have DEP approval have the force of state law from a 40B perspective, or would it be considered an action of a local board? My initial reaction to that is that's something we need to follow up on. Anybody want to answer that right now?
That's my same initial reaction, because I would
Mhm.
want to look at that reference that's made. But my knee-jerk reaction is that a lot of the collaboration is between the town and MassDEP. Board of Health representatives can be there, but usually the town has a consultant involved. And we're not necessarily restricting construction within the watershed permit. That's not its intent. Its intent overall is for management of nitrogen load. And so we do look out the build out or the projected growth over the 20 years, depending what's more applicable for that watershed permit, and how conservative the consultants in the town want to be in their planning. But the goal is not restriction of any construction. So we tried to incorporate the plans of the town within the permit rather than stopping them from executing their plans.
Thanks, Drew. The next question is from Caitlin Shea. If an existing passing Title V system is upgraded to a best available nitrogen reduction technology by just the addition of a secondary treatment unit to the system, will this require a stamp from a RS or PE for adding just that component? Mary Beth?
So just a clarification, a secondary treatment unit is not necessarily a nitrogen reduction technology. You would need to be looking at a nitrogen reducing technology that is approved by DEP as such. And yes, it would follow the same, it's a component of the system. Most of the nitrogen reduction technologies are inserted between the septic tank and the soil absorption system. And so you would need plans and approvals and certifications as are required by Title V and by the technology's approval.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth. The next question is, will this impact CSO discharges?
I can take that one, Tim. So the commenter is referring to combined sewer overflows, which is a type of surface water discharge, and where there is stormwater combined with sanitary sewer that overflows typically during storm events. Those CSOs have long-term control plans under their NPDES permit. And so those reductions of nitrogen and other pollutants from CSOs is being addressed through the long-term control plans under NPDES. This reg doesn't reach those CSO outfalls.
Thanks, Weldon. The next question is a new one. Do systems need to be upgraded upon the sale of the property? And the answer to that question is there's a provision in the proposed Title V changes that would require the seller to determine if they're in a designated nitrogen sensitive area and whether they're subject to the upgrade requirement. And if they are, then they have to notify the Board of Health and the potential buyer or transferee that they are in there and subject to the upgrade requirement. And then it would be something that the buyer and the seller would negotiate at the time of the transaction in terms of the sale of the property. Anything anybody else wants to add to that answer? Okay. The next question is, next new question is from David Devinon, and it's, are systems such as FAST, Singular, and Advantix systems suitable for compliance with the standard? If not, what are the systems that will meet the threshold the DEP is seeking? Mary Beth or Drew, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so currently those systems that you named, David, those are denitrification systems that have general use. And they have demonstrated performance standards of 19 and 25, which is in line with the drinking water protection purpose. And we also have two technologies under provisional use that are seeking to demonstrate they can meet 10 and or 11 or less milligrams per liter. And so we'll see more, we believe we'll see more technologies coming in, and even some of those existing ones that you named coming in to reevaluate what performance standard they can meet. But yes, as it stands right now, those systems under general use would be the best available nitrogen reducing, unless you wanted to utilize a provisional system, which DEP hasn't certified completely. So those are the options that are available. And the threshold, if I don't know if Drew wants to add to that, but the threshold is dependent upon the situation in each area, in each watershed. So DEP isn't establishing a universal threshold that has to be met. We're trying to have technologies be put out there that can assist with the nitrogen removal.
Exactly. It really depends upon the watershed in which the planning is taking place, and how that technology will be used. And as I mentioned earlier, how other technologies complement it, and so that too low of a concentration target isn't placed on one technology to overall, once combining flow to get a load reduction. It's not all placed on one technology, because it makes it very hard on that technology. It's better for multiple technologies to be used with a holistic approach for long-term reduction and consistent maintenance of concentrations within the embayment.
Thank you, Drew. Let's see, it's 1:57. David Davinon has another question. When the local towns have nobody willing to serve on their board of health, due to the extreme stress that forcing people to spend money they don't have will have on their volunteer position, will the DEP provide part-time employees and legal advice on how the town should meet their obligations set forth by DEP? The point is, even with loans available, there will be homeowners who can't afford the loan options. I think, DEP understands this issue, and we understand that there are cost issues associated with this, and we're working on addressing those issues. And also, while it is the local Board of Health's primary duty to require compliance, if that's not happening, and if the local boards of health need assistance, then DEP can help, and it's their obligation to help. I don't know if that answers the question. Anybody else want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I'll just add, we do provide technical assistance to boards of health. They provide us plans, and they ask us on interpretation of the regulations and how different designs are working to meet that. So we do provide that, but we're very optimistic that many towns will be applying for watershed permits just based off of our interaction with the towns and our knowledge of the towns that already have planning ongoing. And so we really encourage that you engage your local town engineers and officials on learning more of what your town has going on and searching on your town websites to better understand.
Thanks, Drew. And we've got time for one more question, one more new question, and it is, it says, this is a rephrase to the 40B question. Will a town with a watershed permit have the authority to require 40B projects to have IA systems, or will 40B override the permits? Example, if HAC were to determine the IA requirements for a particular project made it uneconomic. That's a good question that I think we need to look into further. Anybody else want to respond to that?
I think we need to look further at that question, but again,
Yeah.
A watershed is not basically just takes in any and all sources without any kind of discrimination. So I think it's imperative that we focus on the sources, and for new construction, our messages, just be mindful of potential loads and try to see what could be done to engage in best practices and available infrastructure if it is available within the geographic area of the construction.
All right. That exhausts all of the new questions for the most part. Okay. Well, and we're at the 2 o'clock mark. I want to thank everybody, all the attendees for participating and asking thoughtful questions. As we mentioned previously, this is not a public hearing. This was not a public hearing. It's an information session. So in order to take advantage of the opportunity to provide official public comments that go into the official record and are required to be considered as part of the record, you would have to file written comments as directed on the DEP website under the Title V section, or also go to one of the 3 public hearings that we talked about before. And with that, I think that'll conclude